Rochester, New York. I was number 7 in a family of 10 children. Our family had a farm along the newly built Erie Canal, where we had more routes for trading items. When I was 6 years old, my father took our whole family into Rochester to hear Charles Finney preach. Now that week, Charles Finney was there every day, and people came from all around to hear him. My father was greatly moved by the words of Charles Finney. In fact, he said that was the beginning of our family's religious history. We soon joined the Congregational Church in Henrietta, and were very faithful church goers. Now, when I was 9 years old, I went to the front of the church one day with people who wanted to join the church. Am I in trouble, sir?
Far from it.
Check.
I am in trouble, sir. I don't know about these newfangled things. In my day, we just used our preacher's voice. So, when I was 9 years old, I did go to the front of the church with the people who wanted to join. And it seemed like members of the congregation, some of them didn't think I should join because I was so young. But the congregation voted, and I was allowed to join. Now, if you go visit that church in Henrietta today, and you look at their membership book, you'll see where I signed my name when I was 9 years old. When I was 15, I graduated from Monroe Academy. And the next year, I was invited to teach the younger children in a nearby village. Now, some thought this would be my life, teaching, and I would probably marry a minister and be a minister's wife because of all of my interest in spiritual things. But I had a dream. I wanted to go to college. But those were difficult years for our family. My mother was worn out from childbearing. And my sister Ophelia and my brother Sam died from tuberculosis. So I stayed at home and helped our family. But finally, just before my 21st birthday, I enrolled in Oberlin College. Now, women were not allowed to enter a degree program because it was thought that the subjects were too rigorous for women. But women instead entered what was called the literary program. And we received a diploma at the end of our studies. Now, another thing that was troubling was women were not allowed to speak in class. A woman named Lucy Stone, I met as a classmate. She became my best friend throughout my entire lifetime. And she and I formed a secret society called the Ladies Literary Society, where we could practice our recitation skills with each other. But we had to keep it secret because the faculty wives were very much against uppity women wanting to challenge the role of women. So at the end of my studies, I applied for admission to the theological department. Now, this was not the usual practice because Oberlin thought it was proper to teach women to be teachers and perhaps keep their homes well, but they did not anticipate women wanting to go into a profession. So I went to the head of the department, none other than Charles Finney, the same man who had influenced our family so much in the early years. After a heated discussion with Professor Finney, he allowed me to enter the theological studies as a graduate student studying theology, not entering for a degree, but just allowed to study. But yet again, we ran into that same thing. Women were not allowed to speak in class. So once again, I pleaded my case to Professor Finney, and he finally said I could speak in his class, but that every professor would have to make up his mind whether I could speak in their class. So at the end of my theological studies, I returned home to my town, Henrietta, and my friend Lucy Stone invited me to speak at the first National Women's Rights Convention. I spoke refuting the biblical passages that said women should not speak in church. My friends understood my dilemma, but yet I had another dream. I told my friend Lucy Stone one day, I want to be a minister. She said, "You'll never be able to do that." And I said, "I will do that." So I decided to head out on the lecture circuit. I was licensed by the Congregational church, so I could preach if asked. And on my trials and circulations of towns, I one day preached, if I didn't preach, I spoke at the town of South Butler, New York, which is on the Erie Canal between Rochester and Syracuse. And after my speech was over, members of the congregation came. They had heard me speak, and they invited me to be their pastor. They offered me a salary of $300, and after considering their offer, I accepted. So I went to South Butler and began my duties as pastor. The congregation was pleased with my role, and they wanted to ordain me. Now, some thought that this should be just a quiet kind of in-house sort of thing, but I insisted if I was going to be ordained, that it had to be recognized publicly. So on September 12th, 1853, I was ordained in the South Butler Congregational Church. There was a torrential rainstorm that day, and some were sure that that was God's retribution for allowing a woman to speak in church. In November of that year, I officiated at a wedding, the first woman who was publicly able to officiate at a wedding. I had realized my dream of becoming a minister, but it was more difficult than I anticipated. You see, for most people, the minister was God's representative, and God was God the Father, and the minister was looked up to in that same way. But that wasn't me. My uncertainties and difficulties came to a head in the winter of that year with two circumstances. One was a baby who died of croup. And the congregation wanted me to preach that this was God's retribution for this child having been born to a woman out of wedlock. I couldn't do that because the God I knew, the God I learned as a child, and the God I learned from my mentor, Charles Finney, was a God of forgiveness and kindness and would never preach such a thing. The second happening that really challenged me was that a young boy, probably 10 or 11, grew sick. His mother wanted me to talk to him. And so she wanted me to hold him as if he was over the fires of hell and wanted him to have a conversion on his deathbed so that he would be able to be in heaven for eternity. Once again, I couldn't do what that mother wanted. And so I began to have doubts. I felt very alone. It would be a full 10 years before another woman was ordained. I didn't have anyone I could talk to. I began to question myself. Who was I? Was I even the same person that got ordained a year ago? My doubts, my spiritual crisis began to affect my physical health. And finally, I had to resign my position as pastor of the Congregational Church of South Butler. I returned home to my family home, and after months, my health began to get better. And Horace Greeley invited me to come to New York City to live and work. And so I did. I worked along the slums in New York and just saw how badly conditions were there for women especially. But I also made some new friends there. Among them were the members of the Blackwell family, an interesting family. Perhaps you know of his sister Elizabeth, who was a doctor. Perhaps you know of Emily, who was also a doctor. There were two other sisters who were active in women's rights, and 4 brothers. All of them were abolitionists. But it was Samuel Blackwell, who took an interest in me. But I had never thought of myself as a person who could be in a traditional marriage. After all, a woman could not keep her own earnings. A woman could not sign a contract or own property. Why would any woman want to get married? But Samuel was persistent. And so Samuel and I were married on my family's farm. I just wore a simple wool dress, nothing fancy for me. And then Samuel and I moved to New Jersey, and my best friend, Lucy Stone, had married one of Samuel's brothers, so we were very close to them as they also lived in New Jersey. Now, I continued to preach when asked, and I also joined the Women's Suffrage Association and would speak on women's rights when asked. I was in great demand as a speaker after the publication of The Origin of Species by Charles Darwin, because his theories seemed to counter the theories of the creation in the Bible. So I was speaking a lot, and my Samuel quit his job as an accountant. He stayed home to care for the children while I was out lecturing. Now, it seemed like we had a very busy life. We had 6 daughters, one of them died in infancy, but during my time of being at home with the babies, I spent a great deal of time writing and reading and studying, especially the relationship between science and spirituality. I had 5 books published during that time. Now, also, as the years went on, I began to experience the losses that come to all of us with age. My friends Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton died. My friend Lucy Stone died. And then my beloved Samuel died. So I went to live with my daughter Agnes and enjoyed watching the grandchildren grow. But throughout all of my life, I always considered myself, first and foremost, a minister. Now, working for the rights of women to vote kind of got put on hold when our country entered a war. But finally, in August of 1920, the amendment allowing women the right to vote was ratified. And so on November 2nd of that year, my daughter Agnes drove me in her automobile to the site where we would vote. Now, we took along a camp stool because she thought I might get tired having to wait in line for all of those people. But when I approached the voting site, people in the line stood aside and let me go to the voting booth where I proudly cast my vote for Warren G. Harding because he had supported the right of women to vote. Now, I voted at 95 years old. I was the only one of those people who spoke at the National Women's Rights Convention who was still alive and able to vote. So now, friends, I'm tired. My work is done. But I have to tell you today, never give up on your dreams. Sometimes you may have had dreams come true, but you know, there are forces pushing you back, so you can never give up. So, friends, thank you for allowing me to share my story with you today. And now I would invite you to pray with me. God, our lives are challenging these days. We work for justice, but sometimes we feel like we're being pushed back, even when we try to take small steps forward. And God, we work for fairness. We want to see refugees treated with dignity, and yet every week we hear of more and more refugees being rounded up and taken to detention centers. And we work for peace. But still, conflicts break out all over the world, often in the name of religion. So God, where can we go for help? Mine eyes lift to the hills, from whence cometh my help. My help cometh from the Lord, and from God who will watch over us and guide us from now on and evermore. So friends, in this moment of silence, I invite you now to share personally with your God your hopes and dreams and your fears. And now, would you join with me in the prayer you have printed before you? Holy One, beyond all names, eternal wellspring, may love rise again in us today, with food for every table, shelter for every family, and reverence for every life. Forgive us our failings in love, and free us from all falseness, and clinging to might makes right. May your light shine and strengthen each of us to endure and empower us to live your way. For earth and all people, places, parts of creation, you craft and call good. Be blessed this day, tonight, and forever. Amen.